World of Warcraft, Beyond the Dark Portal, by Aaron Rosenberg and Christy Golden. Chapter 26. Khadgar's head swam, but he felt warm, healing energy spreading through his body. He got to his feet, swaying and swore. The rift was just fading from view, leaving a faint aftermage like a stream trail, and Ner'zhul and his orcs were gone with it. We're too late. It's gone. Gone? By the light, no! Turalian was right behind Khadgar, but apparently hadn't seen the rift. Then again, Khadgar had felt it with his other senses before he actually seen it, although Turalian too wielded great power. His facility with the holy light gave him no particular insight into arcane magic. He must have closed the rift behind him, Khadgar guessed, as he and Turalian stepped back onto the roof itself, Illyria right behind them. But you got the Eye of Dalaran back, Illyria pointed out. That's important, isn't it? Khadgar nodded. Well, what do we do now? She turned her head to gaze down from the Black Temple. It looks like we're winning down there at least. Any way you can follow him? Turalian asked. Khadgar shook his head. I don't know the spell Ner'zhul was using, he admitted, or how to find whatever world that rift took him to. So even if I could open a new rift, there's no guarantee it would open to the same world. His attention was caught by something else, however, and he frowned, stepping forward and walking to the triple circle inlay at the roof. What is it? Power, Khadgar said absently. More power than I ever felt at any one place, save Medivh's tower. He cocked his head to the side. That's why, he murmured. I wonder why Ner'zhul's left Hellfire Citadel to us instead of defending it properly and casting the spell from there. But he couldn't. He had to be here. He needed the magic here to fuel his ritual. Does it help us any? Illyria asked. I'm not sure, he replied. Perhaps. He stepped back into the center of the circle, and his head snapped back, mouth falling open in a silent scream. Such power! It poured through him like wildfire, igniting his veins, sending every sense into overload. Ner'zhul was a shaman, not a mage. His magic came from the earth and the sky and the water, and from the world itself. And that was what this place was, a focal point for the world's power. For Ner'zhul, it would have been like tapping full force into something he already broached repeatedly, but on a lesser scale. He knew how to handle it. For Khadgar, however, it was a completely new experience, and a dangerous one. But Khadgar was not an archmage for nothing. He had been a promising student at Dalaran, and had learned much during his brief apprenticeship with Medivh, and far more afterward. He was a master of magic, and while this form was new, it was still magic, and that meant it was still a matter of willpower. And Khadgar had will. Slowly, he reined in his senses, forcing the new energy down until it was merely a background hum. Then he opened his eyes and gasped. Standing here now, flooded with the power of the whole world, he could see what he couldn't see previously. No, he breathed. What is it? Turalian asked. The rifts, Khadgar breathed, barely able to fill the words to encompass the scope of it. Ner'zhul didn't just open one. He opened many. So many, all over this poor world. They flickered and glittered, looking almost like fireflies on a hot summer evening. The scope of this. I don't think Draenor can bear it. It can't hold all of this. Rifts are tears, and these tears are going to rip the whole damn place apart. And us with it, he thought, but did not say. Turalian and Allura looked at each other. As one, they turned to Khadgar. What do we do? How long do we have left? Even as he formed the words, a shudder passed through the temple and the land around it. The volcano before it trembled, spewing even more of its nauseous lava out into the air and creating a billowing green cloud. Then they heard a horrible crack and a deafening rumble from behind him. Glancing over his shoulder, Khadgar watched as the mountain of rock cascading down literally The Black Temple had been built up against the mountain that overlooked the sea, and those peaks were crumbling away. Most of the debris was falling into the waters, but some of it exploded towards them instead. Thinking quickly, Khadgar murmured a spell that shielded them from the onslaught, and the three of them stood untouched as rock and gravel and dust flew on either side. A second spell protected the area directly below where the Alliance forces were already mopping up the remaining horde. Many of the orcs had scattered when the battle had turned against them, and the sudden avalanche only hastened their headlong fight. Draenor, as he realized it would be, was a beast in pain, tearing itself into pieces. And Khadgar realized Draenor might not die alone. "Azeroth is in danger!" he yelled over the din. "These rifts are linked between worlds, and the Dark Portal is the largest and most stable one." There was an odd silence for a moment. The earth stilled. Khadgar spoke quickly. "Our worlds are connected. Damage here could leak through the portal and affect Azeroth as well." He grimaced and stepped out of the circle, trying not to groan in dismay as the energy levels plummeted back to normal. It was like turning away from a bonfire and accepting the weak torch in its place. But he knew that to stay there longer would endanger them all. "I have to get back to the Dark Portal." "Do you have what you need to close it?" "I have the skull and the book here. Somewhere. I'll find it," he said with more assurance than he felt. Torelli nodded. "I'll rally the troops," he promised. But Khadgar shook his head. "There's no time," he insisted, grabbing his friend's shoulder. "Don't you understand? I'm sorry, Tyrellian. So sorry, but if I can't shut down the portal right away, when Draenor is destroyed, it could take Azeroth with it." He saw the realization dawn in Tyrellian's eyes, and hated the grim resignation he saw accompanying it. But his friend merely nodded. "We'll take Griffins," he announced. "The fastest way back." Then he squared his shoulders. "I will speak to the troops before we go, however. In short time, maybe. They deserve that." He extended a hand to Illyria, and together they ran down the stairs. Khadgar barely noticed them depart. He snatched the eye out of Ner'zhul's hand, but he hadn't had time to locate the Book of Medivh before Ner'zhul had retaliated. It was here, he told himself. It had to be in order for the spell to work in harmony. With the three constellations, Ner'zhul had still been clutching a silver-trimmed scepter when he disappeared, presumably the Spectre of Sargeras. Fine. Far safer than an accursed item will be well away from Azeroth. But where was the blasted book? He needed to he needed to finish the job, and that job had to be finished right now before it was too late for all of them. He extended his senses, but there was too much magic in the air for him to sense anything clearly. The book could be right beneath my nose or miles away, damn it, he thought in frustration. Khadgar caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye. He whirled, ready to defend himself. One of the bodies had moved, just a little. Its midsection was badly charred, and Khadgar realized that this was the orc Ner'zhul had attacked just before going through the portal. The one who Ner'zhul called a coward for leaving the others behind. Again, Khadgar was grateful he brought the ring that had enabled him to understand other languages, and he lowered his hands, watching closely. The orc heaved and grunted, obviously in tremendous pain. It reached for something, and with great effort held it out to Khadgar with an arm that shook. It was large, heavily embossed rectangle with carved metal edges. Khadgar caught his breath as he recognized it. The Book of Medivh. "I am no shaman. Ormus is smart enough to know that this will be of use to you, will it not?" Khadgar hesitated. The orc was a few steps away from death, but it could still be some kind of trick. "Yes," he said at last. "Why did you give it to me then? I am your enemy." "You, at least, are an honorable foe," Orbis growled. "Ner'zhul betrayed us. He reformed the Horde and forced my Laughing Skull clan back into the fold. He promised us a new start. But as soon as..." He coughed and then continued in a ragged voice. "As soon as he found safety, he fled. He and his favorite live. The rest of us, we are nothing to them." His eyes flashed with a final spark.
It would please me to know my last act was to defy him. Take it. Take it, curse you. Take it and make him pay for his treachery.
Khadgar moved toward the dying orc and gently took the book from his blackened, bloody hands.
I promise you, Orbis, we will do everything in our power to stop Ner'zhul.
The orc nodded, closed his eyes, and went still. The vagaries of fate, Khadgar mused, quickly undoing the clasp and opening the book to glance through its pages. He remembered first seeing this massive tome back in Medivh's library only a few years ago. So much had changed since then. It felt like a lifetime. Then he had been terrified of the book, but overpowered by curiosity. Fortunately, its words had prevented him from even turning the cover, or else the magics contained within might have destroyed him. Now, Khadgar bypassed them with ease and skimmed the book's contents with glowing excitement. As he expected, the book contained details about how Medivh and Gul'dan had worked together to create the rift, armed with the necessary details and the still lingering power in Gul'dan's skull. Khadgar was confident he could now shut down the dark portal for good. But could he do it so in time? He glanced up at the sound of beating wings. Several griffins were circling the roof, wings spread as they prepared to land. Khadgar spotted Kurdrin, and another Wildhammer was gesturing to the mage. Nodding, he threw the book in his sack, handed the precious bag up, then gripped the Wildhammer's outstretched hand and swung himself onto the griffin.
Where are Illyria and Turalian?
Khadgar shouted to Kurdrin.
Speaking to the troops,
the dwarf replied.
They'll have to catch up then, Khadgar said, shaking his head. We don't have time to waste. To the dark portal!
The griffins squawked as their riders tugged on the reins. Then they wheeled about and rose, wings beating hard against the wind and the weight of 2 passengers each. Khadgar watched the Black Temple slip away behind them and closed his eyes, his hair and beard streaming out behind him. He held the sack close. With the griffins, they would reach the portal in minutes instead of hours or days. We just hoped it would be soon enough. Illyria rested her head on her lover's shoulder. As the griffins they rode hovered over the Black Temple, she squeezed Turalian's waist gently, giving him silent support. She knew how bleak his heart was at what he was about to do, but she also knew he would not shrink from what had to be done.
Sons of Lothar!
Turalian cried, raising his hammer high above his head. Illyria glanced away, its lights piercing the clouds gathering above, shedding a brilliant white radiance upon the entire valley. From the Black Temple behind them, the mouth of the Alliance fort, to the mouth of the Alliance fort far ahead.
Months ago, we came through the dark portal, not knowing what awaited us, but knowing that we had to come. We had to come to stop the Horde from taking other worlds as it tried and failed to do with our beloved Azeroth. And the moment to do precisely that has arrived. Khadgar has what he needs in order to close the portal, but this world is in chaos. Our home is in danger once again. We must all do everything we can to serve as best we may, to save it and our families we have left behind.
He looked out over the men before him, and Illyria knew he was burning each face into memory.
I will go to help Khadgar to protect him, for I'm sure there will be resistance. You must hold the line here. You have never failed me yet. I know, my brothers, you will not fail me now.
His voice cracked. Through the tears in her own eyes, Illyria saw that he wept.
None of us know what will happen. We may survive this and find our way home, and live to a ripe old age with stories to dazzle our grandchildren. Or we may die here with this world. If such is our fate, I know each of you choose it gladly, for we fight for our world, our families, our honor. We fight so that others may live free because of what we do here. Today, this hour, this moment. And if there is anything in this world or other worth dying for, the light knows it is this.
Illyria stared at him. His eyes, though still filled with tears, shone now with a radiant white light, all silvered through her. Bright, Trollian, my love, you are so bright.
Sons of Lothar, the light is with you, as it always has been, always will be. For Azeroth!
The Zammer glowed brighter than the day, and the many of the captured orcs nearby fell to the ground, screaming as its aura burned at their eyes. Trollian soldiers were strengthened by the glow, however, and cheered as the griffin rose, carrying Trollian Illyria after the Wildhammers toward the dark portal. I could stand with them, he murmured softly. She kissed his neck. You do, beloved. The hearts are filled with delight, and so you are there. The scene around the dark portal was utter chaos. Trollian had told his troops the unvarnished truth. Khadgar would need defending. He just hadn't realized how much he and his friends would be defending the wizard from. Daneth, Khadgar, Kurdran, and several others had arrived before them and were fiercely fighting their way to the portal. It seemed the orcs have rallied. Ner'zhul's abrupt departure had stranded several clans on Draenor, and all of them had realized the same thing. The dark portal was the only stable rift, and the only one that led to a world they knew was hospitable. Nor was the battle just on Draenor. One was raging the other side of the portal as well, it would seem. That once again the orcs had wrestled control of the portal from the Alliance. They were trying to push their way through the portal back to Draenor, unaware of the cataclysm gripping their homeworld. The Alliance forces, they were holding them at bay for the moment, but Trollian could expect no aid. He and his handful were all that stood between the Horde and Azeroth. But they weren't here to win a battle, he reminded himself. That was entirely secondary right now. Their goal was simply to protect Khadgar and the other Magi while they closed the portal once and for all. Do what you have to do. Do what you have to do, he told Khadgar, who stood nearby, the other Magi clustered around him. The young old mage nodded and raised his hands, laying his eyes closed, his staff in one hand, the skull of Gul'dan in the other, and he began to chant, energies coinciding and swirling around him. The orcs outnumbered them by a significant margin and were fighting in a frenzy, desperate to escape their collapsing world by any means necessary. The ground was trembling so violently warriors could barely keep their feet, and the battle devolved into mere brawling as orc and humans swung wildly at each other, unable to concentrate enough to attack more efficiently. The sky split with lightning, storms appearing and disappearing at blurring speeds, stars visible one instant and sun the next. The planet was going mad. Between skirmishes, Trollian caught glimpses of Khadgar. The other Magi had joined in now, all of them outlined in radiance. And when he squinted, Trollian could see the trails of energy they were pouring into Khadgar, who stood at their center. He knew his friend was absorbing all of that magic so that he could focus it upon the portal and destroy it for good. Just as Khadgar's chanting reached a fever pitch, Trollian heard a strange ripping sound, sharp, but somehow faint as well, as if it had occurred both nearby and far away. He'd heard something similar on top of Black Temple. After dispatching another orc, he glanced around and saw a strange shimmer in the air. Not far from them, a short ways behind the Magi, a new rift. The earth shook beneath his feet, and on pure gut instinct, Trollian leaped backwards. A fissure opened where he had been standing just a second before, whining like a hungry mouth. Cracks raced around, jagged, and then suddenly an enormous chunk of earth surged upwards, carrying with it a small cluster of men and orcs, bucking them off like an unbroken steed as it turned wildly in midair. Khadgar hadn't exaggerated. Draenor quite literally was physically tearing itself into pieces. He was still staring at the floating hunk of earth when Khadgar raised his staff high and a beam of light shot from it to strike the dark portal in its center. The light was too bright to look upon, but unlike the holy light, this was many colors all at once, swirling and dancing and shifting. It was pure magic, wrought into a powerful spell, and when it struck the whirling surface of the portal, he heard a sound like shattering glass. Then, the dark portal began to crumble, its current of energy spitting and fragmenting as the spell unwrathed it. It is done, Khadgar said, wearily planting his staff against the ground and leaning heavily upon it. Then he looked up and spotted one of Kurgan's dwarves, a young wildhammer who had just hurled his stormhammer at a hulking orc that had threatened Daneth. "You!" Khadgar shouted. "Take these!" He slammed the skull into his sack and thrusted the unwieldy bundle at the surprised dwarf. "Take it and fly back to Azeroth. This needs to get to the Kirin Tor." "But sir," the young dwarf said, "are you not coming through yourselves?" Khadgar shook his white head. "No. We've got to shut it down here. It's the only way to make sure the damage happening here won't follow us into Azeroth." Turalyon inhaled swiftly. So there it was then. Khadgar had never been one to mince words, and he just said bluntly what they all suspected. Only this one dwarf would make it back. The rest of them would be stranded in a world that lurched closer to nothingness by the second. So be it. The paladin saw the young wildhammer hesitate, not sure how to respond, and then gasped as he saw a gleam of arc of a massive axe slicing directly toward the unwary dwarf. Before Turalyon can shout a warning to the stormhammer, a stormhammer flashed past, striking the axe wielder with a thunderclap that rang his ears, and the axe and orc fell to the ground. "Go on, lad!" Kurgan ordered his stormhammer, returning to his grasp as he wheeled Skyrie alongside the surprised dwarf. The younger dwarf nodded, leaned down to grab the sack from Khadgar, and then nudged his griffin with heel and knee and elbow. She responded at once, beating her wings hard and rising like a shot, then arrowing straight for the collapsing portal. As she passed under the crackling arches, the sack flared with light, and the portal responded, the resulting glare blinding them all. Turalyon heard the griffin shriek in pain and the dwarf scream as well, but he could not see what happened to them. The terrible sounds were drowned out by ferocious rumbling. Before he fully realized what had happened, there was a deafening crash, and Khadgar was flying backwards. He landed hard, blacking out for a second. When he came to an instant later, aching and barely able to breathe, he looked immediately towards the portal. It was gone. The giant statues that had guarded it had trembled into unrecognizable boulders. 3 pillars that had formed the gateway had contained the rift in glorious carved majesty were now nothing but rubble. No sight of Azeroth remained. They had done it. They had destroyed the rift and the portal, and now they were forever cut off from everything they had known. All around him, Horde and Alliance were staggering to their feet, only to feel Draenor buck beneath them again. The orcs took off, not understanding, as Khadgar did, that there was really nowhere for them to run. The portal collapse had apparently injured Draenor further, and the upheaval grew in intensity and frequency. They were constantly jarred and tossed about as if they were a small boat on an angry sea, the ground ripping like water and the sky thicker than fog. What an ignominious death, Khadgar thought, with a hint of wear and amusement, having one's brains bashed out by a chunk of earth. He looked around one last time at his friends. Daneth, still on his feet, still fighting what orcs hadn't fled. Illyria had fallen, and Turalyon was helping her to her feet, quickly wrapping linen around a nasty gash on her arm. Perhaps feeling Khadgar's gaze, Turalyon looked up. Their eyes met for a moment, and Turalyon smiled. That calm, gentle smile that Khadgar associated with the paladin. Illyria glanced at the archmage as well, and nodded her head. The bright gold dimmed with the dust and matte here and there with blood. Kurgan, still hovering on Skyrie, raised a hammer in salute. And so it would end. Khadgar had always suspected they wouldn't survive this, but he was fiercely grateful they had been able to close the portal and save the world. And he was equally grateful that if they had to die, which, he mused warily, all men did, it would be here together, fighting side by side as they always had. A faint glimmer caught his eye. He blinked. No, it was there, a ripple in the fabric of space and time. Another rift. Another world, one that perhaps wasn't shuddering in its death throes. "There!" he yelled, as loudly as he could, pointing at the rift. "We go through there! It's the only chance we've got!" Turalyon and Illyria looked at one another. Khadgar couldn't hear what they said over the deafening noise of the world shaking itself to pieces, but he saw them hold each other for a moment before joining hands, and they turned to the rift. They had all ventured forth through the dark portal into Draenor, but at least They hadn't had, but at least they had a vague idea of what they would find. But this? Drainer's death throes continued, and Khadgar hit the earth hard, scrambling to his feet, knees and palms scraped raw, and he looked toward the rift. Salvation or a far worse fate? He didn't know. None of them knew. They just had to find out one way or the other. Khadgar, Archmage, old man, youth, swallowed hard and steeled himself and ran through. Chapter 27.
Push on, Horde Warriors! We are not far!
Grom Hellscream's voice cut through the din, heartening those who heard it. Rexar spun, the battle axe in his left hand shearing through an Alliance warrior's neck, and the matching axe in his right slicing down to split another warrior from shoulder to waist. Beside him, his wolf, Harthana, snarled and lunged in. His massive jaws snapped shut upon a third warrior's forearm. Rexar heard the destructive crunch of teeth splintering bone, and the man cried out, sword falling from his hand. Harthana released the mangled arm, and in a lightning-fast move, sprang and clutched the man's throat in his jaws. They made a lethal team. Off to one side, Rexar could see Grom Hellscream, cheating to the war song, Gorehouse shrieking and slicing through foes. Other warsong warriors fought beside their leader, their chants and battle cries blending together into an eerie melody of death and destruction. Rexar was one of the few left who wasn't from the clan, but it was not unusual for him. He didn't really have a clan, at least not one involved in the Horde. His own people, the Nathanael, had always been stubbornly independent, small in number. Their lives had been difficult and forced on maintaining their traditional land on Blade's Edge Mountains, defending it against the ogres who sought to claim it. Rexar had tried to tell his father, the Rocks, about the Dark Portal the Orcs were building, and the chance to find a fresh new world for the beleaguered Nathanael. But the Rocks saw only that his son was not staying where he had been born, to fight to protect his homeland. Both had the goal of helping their people, but in the end, Rexar had followed the Horde and been disowned for his choice. Now, it was the only family he had. But then, he had always been different. Another human went down. Rexar glanced up, his height allowing him to see over the other warriors. Grom was right. They were not far from the Dark Portal. Perhaps 100 humans stood between him and his homeworld. Rexar grinned and raised both axes. He was about to thin that number considerably. Over the last few months, the fortunes of war had swung back and forth. The Alliance had penned them in a small valley adjoining this one for a short time, but could not hold the Horde there for long. The human warriors had underestimated the will and ferocity of the cornered orcs, and Grom had led his people to freedom. They had regrouped in a place to the north called Stonard, and had been the first outpost the Horde had created when they had come through the Dark Portal originally. The swamp through the fid and unpleasant held life and water, and Grom had refused to let the orcs fall into despair. They had built up Stonard, augmented it with raids on Alliance supplies, and had eventually regained control of the portal. Back and forth the Horde and Alliance had gone, but now the little game was at an end. Grom had decided that it was time to return. No other clans had come to aid them, and while they were still fighting for a fighting force to be reckoned with, as the Alliance was discovering now, the numbers were slowly dwindling while the Alliance seemed to breed more by the minute. 2, there was the matter of that strange device, the one the Warlocks had tried to activate. They had told Grom that it would create a shield to protect them from attack and make it easier to defend the Dark Portal. But the thing had been designed to destroy, not to protect. Someone was ready to abandon them here, and Grom Hellscream would not let his people die because of another's treachery. Rexar wanted to be around when Grom returned and confront the ones who had issued the order. A human charged him on horseback, sword raised high, shield set before him, but the soldier hadn't counted on Rexar's height. Rexar struck the shield a heavy blow with one axe, smashing it into the man, while knocking the sword away with the other. As the rider was jolted from his saddle, Rexar brought both axes up, let the man's own momentum impale him on the blades. He grinned. and let loose a fierce war cry as he yanked the axes free and stepped over the dead soldiers. The riderless horse turning and fleeing, Harthorne's snapping jaw. Sometimes it was good to be a half-ogre. Something flickered at the corner of his visions, from inside the dark portal. He had only seen it for a second, but he'd gotten a clear impression of lightning, rolling dust clouds, lashing waves, and shifting grounds. Always before the portal had shown the other side, so he had been able to catch glimpses of Draenor during the fight. But what he had just seen was not his homeworld. It was a place of a nightmare. Another Alliance soldier attacked him then, and that brought Rexar's mind instantly back to the battle. He dispatched the warrior easily, but with a handspan or two away from him, another orc was not so lucky. Clad in the robes of a warlock, the orc had green skin of most horde members. Unlike Rexar himself, who had not joined the horde until shortly before they invaded Azeroth, there were several warlocks here. Some of them quite powerful, but their death magics took time, and things happened quickly in battle. Two warriors attacked the warlock together, and while the orc had managed to disable one, sending him fleeing with a mindless terror, the other had stabbed the warlock through the chest before a nearby warsong warrior had carved the human skull with a shrieking war club. Now the warlock staggered. One hand pressed to the blossoming bloodstain across his front, his skin already turning pale, sweat breaking out on his brow. Rexar merely grunted and shook his head. He had little use for warlocks, and this one had clearly not been prepared for combat. The motion caught the warlock's gaze, and the wounded orc stared at Rexar. Disgust and disdain washed across his features in turn. Then he staggered forward with his other hand palm out.
You, half-breed. You're not true horde. You're not true orc, but you'll do. Come here.
Rexar stared at the warlock, too surprised to respond. What? This warlock insulted him and then expected him to help? Was he completely mad? But then the warlock drew closer. Rexar saw the green glow outlining the orc's fingers and sucked in a quick breath as he felt a rare burst of fear. No, the warlock didn't want his help. He wanted Rexar's life. Warlocks could leech life energy off others, healing themselves by draining another. The process had a high cost, and a severe wound could easily render a healthy orc's life. And this warlock's wound was mortal. Rexar tried to step back, but he was boxed in, the orcs and humans behind him too tightly packed for him to move. He growled instead and raised both axes, determined to cut down the warlock rather than die himself. But the orc gestured, and suddenly Rexar dropped to his knees. Unbelievable agony racing through him.
What? No longer sure of yourself?
The warlock taunted softly, stepping up close enough that his breath tickled Rexar's skin. Rexar crumbled and withered in pain, too crippled by it to struggle.
Does it hurt? Do not worry. Soon the pain will be gone.
He raised his hand slowly, deliberately, drawing the moment out, and Rexar stared as the green-limbed flesh inched closer. Already he thought he could feel his energy being drawn from him, and a wave of fatigue washed over him. A fierce snarl cut through the haze of torment, and a large black blur slammed into the warlock.
Arthur, no!
With the warlock's distraction, the spell broke and Rexar could move again. But he was too late. His devoted wolf companion had shoved the warlock away, but in the process the orc's hand had touched Harthor's thick pelt. Rexar stared, horrified, as his friend shriveled before his eyes, the powerful wolf shrinking in upon itself in an instant, and then collapsed, its body turning to dust that the wind carried away.
That feels better,
the warlock remarked, raising to his feet and brushing off his robes. The bloodstain remained, but now he moved without injury.
Your pet just saved your life,
he told Rexar with a nasty grin.
Yes, he did,
Rexar replied softly, twirling both axes up and around.
But who will save yours?
With a snap of his wrists and a roll of his shoulders, the axes came arcing back down and drove deep into the warlock's chest on either side of his head. Rexar had put much of his considerable strength into the blow, and the warlock crashed to his knees as the impact drove him down. the axes ripping through him and leaving him to collapse into pieces upon the blood-soaked ground. Rexar stared at the body, panting, then turned to look at the spot where the wolf had died. The rage still roaring through him and thundering in his ears, he knelt and placed a hand wet with the warlock's blood on the dust for a moment. "You are avenged, my friend," he said softly, "though I would you were still by my side." He took a breath and rose, channeling his grief and rage into action, calling out for the war song leader. Gron looked up, saw Rexar, and waved his axe to acknowledge the half-orc. One thing Rexar had always liked about the war song leader, for all his savagery and violence, Grom had always given him same respect he would show any warrior. He'd always shown Grom proper respect in return, but right now results were more important than manners. "The portal!" Rexar yelled, pointing. "Something's wrong!" Grom glanced toward the portal, just as a handful of orcs staggered through. At first Rexar's heart lifted, thinking the horde had been sent to help them after all, but then he saw that these orcs were already battered and bleeding, and that they were running rather than marching. Running as if fleeing something on Draenor's side. "Run!" one of them shouted as he barreled into a Alliance soldier hard enough to knock the man over, and kept right on going without even stopping to acknowledge the prone target. "Run!" "What is going on?" Grom demanded, and Rexar shrugged, just confused. They were both still staring toward the dark portal, as the scene in it framed changed from crazed landscape of a moment before to an utter maelstrom of swirling color, then complete darkness. And then it vanished. A heartbeat later, the stone fragments that had enclosed the portal, the rift between worlds itself, began to creak and groan. A sound increased, straining, raising to a crescendo, and then the center snapped. The two massive halves topped inwards and collapsed with a loud crack and a cloud of dust and rock chips. The support pillars fell next, knocked off balance by the initial impact, and Rexar ducked his head, pulling the edge of his hood over his mouth to avoid choking on the dust that billowed forth. Orcs and humans alike were scattering, trying to escape the confusion and debris. "No!" someone was screaming, and the other groans and cries filled the air. For his part, Rexar was struck dumb, staring at the rubble that had once been the gateway between worlds. The portal. Gone. Didn't that mean they could never go home? What would happen to them now? Fortunately, one orc kept his head. "We will regroup!" Grom shouted, slapping Rexar on the shoulder. "You gather everyone on that side, I'll get them from this side. Move toward the mouth of the valley." Rexar was jarred from his paralysis and nodded, hurrying to obey. He let the hood fall once again. He was clear of the swirling dust. He could still feel the panic within, but forced it back by concentrating on the task Grom had assigned him. Every orc he saw in the directed back towards the valley's front, and whether because of his size or axes he wielded, or simply because they were desperate for orders, the orcs all obeyed without dispute. By the time Rexar reached the mouth himself, Grom was back as well, and all the horde members still in Azeroth were with them. Most of them looked as stunned as Rexar felt. "Grom, the portal is gone!" one of them wailed. "What do we do?" "Yes, the portal is gone, and the Alliance regroups," Grom announced loudly, gesturing to where the humans were gathering in front of what had been the portal just moments before. "They think we'll be easy prey. They think we will be lost and frightened without the portal. But they will be wrong! We are the Horde!" His glowing red eyes scanned the crowd before him, and he lifted Gorhal. "We head north, back to Stonehard. We discover what happened to our world. We tend to our wounded. We survive. Then we regroup so we can face the humans on their terms rather than theirs," he growled. The Alliance closes in. "The Alliance closes in! They will not take us!" A resounding no lifted from what Rexar presumably feared was the last remnants of the orcish horde. Grom grinned, tilted his head back, opened his black-toothed jaw, and uttered his battle cry before he charged his people following. That one. Grom marched up to the orcs sitting huddled beside the fire as they camped in Stonard that night. It was not dusty or bloody, and Grom knew all his warriors. Grom clapped his hand down on the orc's shoulder and yanked him backwards, looming over the orcs whose eyes were wide with surprise. Beside Grom toed Rexar. As easily as if he were hosting a child, Grom lifted the orc and held him in the air. The orc's feet kicked and flailed. The Warsong chieftain leaned in close. "Now," Grom said softly, a deep scowl on his face. "What in the ancestors happened back there?" Shivering, the orc frankly told all he knew. The other orcs listened. The only sound was the orc's rapid talking, the crackling of the fire, and the omnipresent sound of the swamp that night. When he was finished, no one spoke. They simply stared, shocked beyond speech. Finally, after several minutes, Grom shook himself. "So," he growled, glaring at the others, and half-stammered, half-intimidating them into looking away. Shuffling their feet and straightening up. "We prepare, then. Prepare," Rexar cried, and Grom turned to face the half-orc, half-ogre warrior. "Prepare for what, Hellscream? Our whole world is dead. Our people are dead, and we're trapped here forever, alone. What in the name of the answers should we prepare for?" Rexar's grip on his axes was so tight, Grom thought he had heard the stone shaft creak from strain. "We prepare for vengeance for the dead," Grom snapped, an image of Garrosh leaping to his mind's eye once more. His son and heir. My boy, he thought. My boy, dead like the rest. "We are all that's left," he insisted, rounding upon the other orcs. "We are the Horde now. If we give up, it means the end of everything we knew, everything we cared about. Our race will not die unless we lie down and accept death like craven weaklings. If Ner'zhul's plans, Ner'zhul!" Rexar shouted, leaning down so his face was right in Grom's. "This must be his fault. Who else could have caused a world to shatter so? He betrayed us all. He said he would save Draenor, and instead he destroyed it!" "We don't know that," Grom insisted. "We knew he was dealing with extremely powerful magics to open portals to other worlds. Perhaps something went wrong."